Delighted to have the opportunity to welcome Delegate Schuyler VanValkenburg to This Week in Virginia. Delegate VanValkenburg was first elected in 2017. He's in the middle of his second term in the General Assembly. We're delighted to have you on. Key member of the House Privileges and Elections Committee and a chair of a subcommittee that deals with lots of election issues. And Schuyler, Sunday, when I saw the piece in the Richmond Times-Dispatch, Protecting Virginia's Democracy, talking about the Virginia Voting Rights Act, I knew I wanted to have you on. Now, I will say right now that someone who's also in the screen with us is Angel Minor, who's a senior at VCU. She's going to be working with me this semester, doing some co-hosting. And election issues are really interesting and important to her. And so she's delighted to be on with us for the interview. First question, why do we need a Voting Rights Act in Virginia? Isn't that something that's really federal? So why do we need it?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on, David, and thank you for having me on, Angel. And that's a great question because in some ways, the best answer is a federal answer, and so it requires kind of a little history. In 1965, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act, which had, over the course of years had been reauthorized many times, and that law protected voting rights over all 50 states in kind of two ways. Section 2 of the law applied to all 50 states and gave citizens a mechanism to sue those state governments if they had evidence that an election law or an election procedure discriminated based on racial and ethnic minorities. And if it did so, they could get those laws struck down. And it also had Section 5, the more famous provision, which is called preclearance, clear before. And that was a handful of states and localities were subject to Section 5 preclearance. And there was a formula for it based on kind of histories of states. And you could be put into preclearance or you could be taken out based on contemporary behavior. That section forced states like Virginia, who had a history of discriminating, to get all of their election changes pre-cleared by the federal government. And as historically is the most effective tool to protect voting rights that we've seen. That was in place until Shelby County v. Holder, which was a Supreme Court case about a decade ago, where the Supreme Court shot down the coverage formula to determine what states and localities were under preclearance. The obvious solution to that is that Congress reauthorize a new coverage formula. And if that would happen, we would have a federal preclearance again. But that hasn't happened for the last decade or so. And so as a result, this is where states can step in and protect their citizens. And so that's what House Bill 1883 does, is it provides a preclearance mechanism whereby localities that could discriminate because their populations are diverse, or localities that localities that had not gotten out of preclearance in the Federal Voting Rights Act would have to get election procedures, kind of most importantly, like precinct changes, changing your precinct from one church to, say, a government building would have to be pre-cleared by the Attorney General or the state courts. It's important to note Delegate Sia Price also has a similar bill that kind of also hits at this issue in a different way, which is House Bill 1890. And so, to kind of come back and answer, I think, what was your first question, which is, why? Virginia's done a lot of great work in the last year or so in really making voter accessibility, easier, to making our election law stronger. And we've seen that most obviously with no excuse absentee voting and 45 days of early voting, but we've done it in a whole other variety of ways, say election day as a holiday as an example. And that voter access is vital, it's important, but we also have to make sure on the back end that localities aren't making decisions, intentionally or not, that have the effect of discriminating on certain groups of people. Oftentimes what we see is localities will make a decision, changing where the early voting is, in the case of Richmond City last year, changing the registrar's office 2 years ago in Virginia Beach, a mile off the bus loop, trying to shorten early voting up in Prince William County 3 years ago. We see decisions that are made, well, maybe not intended to adversely affect racial and ethnic minorities. It has the effect of doing so. And so that's why this bill is important.
And if I understand, and I've read through the bill, localities that were exempt from preclearance under the federal act when it was in place, if this legislation passes, would still be exempt. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. So, Fairfax County is an example of that. If you have shown over the course of time that you have, gotten past, the historical discrimination that had occurred and you were able to get out of preclearance, you would not be brought into this bill's preclearance mechanism. Now, having said that, there's a trigger so that if you do start discriminating based on race or ethnicity, you can be put back under preclearance. So it works kind of both ways. You can get yourself, you can be off of it, but you can get yourself back on. But that is correct. That this is really looking at ensuring that places that when Section 5 became defunct post Shelby County v. Holder are still under some kind of voting protections.
You teach civics, you know the subject. So let's say this passes, and then the federal government comes around, passes. Then we all know that the federal law would supersede Virginia. But if anything should happen in decades to come, that the federal government eliminated something, the Virginia law would still be in place. Is that also part of the thinking?
Yeah, I think that's right. And we're not, it's not clear anyway that a revised Voting Rights Act would get through, would pass muster with the current Supreme Court. We know that there are multiple judges on the Supreme Court who are hostile to preclearance in general. Justice Roberts in his decision kind of forecasted that opinion. Since that case, we've got, I think, 3 new judges. And so we don't even know if a revised federal law, which I hope it would pass muster with the Supreme Court, because I do believe it's clearly constitutional. But you have those concerns. Of course, you always have the concerns of what the federal government will do in the future. We've seen voting rights. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 for a long period of time was a bipartisan bill. They got bipartisan votes. And that includes the last time it was reauthorized, which was under the Bush administration, the second Bush, in the early 2000s. And it really only became after the Shelby County case that we saw voting get a little more partisan, right? And so, you can only handle your own house, right? And so I think the Commonwealth of Virginia should be a leader in having protections at the state level. Yes, I would like the federal government to act. I would hope that they could get a revised Voting Rights Act through. Maybe in this new Congress that's possible. Maybe it's not. But, we in Virginia, we should be a leader. We should be a leader on voting rights. We're arguably the home of American constitutional democracy. We haven't always lived up to that to that title. We've had dark times when it comes to voting, looking at, for instance, Jim Crow. But there's no reason why we can't be a leader. We can't show people the way, and we can't be a leader in 3 things: voter accessibility, really having transparent, sophisticated election law that creates clear processes, right? And then protecting everybody's ability to vote. Those are the 3 core components to having what I would call, a functioning democratic system, small d, democratic system. And so, we've already started leading the way in voter access. We've already started leading the way in having a really clear, transparent election law. Let's take that next step and do it for voting rights as well.
So whether it's your bill or Delegate Price's bill or some combination of the two, are you bullish about seeing something pass and go to the governor this session?
Yeah, it's all tricky, and we're in this virtual world as we are right now on the interview. But yeah, I am. I think people understand its need. People understand. Maybe us acting can prompt Congress to act. But more importantly, I think people realize that over the last couple of years, we've really seen threats to our democracy. We've seen loss of faith in our democracy. We've seen people lie about our elections. And one of the quotes from my op-ed that has really stuck with me is a guy who wrote recently, "The way to shore up American democracy is to shore up American democracy." And boy, does that seem right to me, right? That go to your fundamentals, make sure your elections are accessible, they work well, make sure people's vote matter, and do the things that bring faith in the system because people can participate.
So Delegate VanValkenburg, let's switch over and talk about some of the changes to the election law. They were made through the budget, but now they're being proposed at this point in freestanding legislation. Tell us what's in your bill and maybe some other bills that would make some changes more permanent to voting issues.
Sure. Yeah. So let me set the stage first of the work we did in the last year. We started, coming into the regular session in 2020. We were ranked 49th for voter access. The only state that made it harder to vote for its citizens was Mississippi. And the changes that we made over the course of a year moved us up in that rating to 12th. And it came in two buckets. The first was regular session, where we did a lot of the kind of things that you would have seen as a voter on the ground. 45 days of early voting, expanded absentee, no excuse absentee ballots. We made Election Day a holiday, but we also did small things. Like, for instance, if your absentee ballot was postmarked by Election Day, it would count even if it came in up to the Friday after Election Day. And so we did a lot of things to kind of make voting more accessible, but also to kind of root it in the law. Coming back into special session 6 months later, we were trying to expand upon that and also make sure people could vote in COVID times. And so we put 4 measures into the budget. One was drop boxes, so that you could turn your absentee ballot in by drop box rather than by mail. 2 was a curing process, which is a fancy way of saying if you turned in your absentee ballot and had made a mistake, the registrars would call you and you'd have a chance to fix it. The 3rd was waiving the witness signature on absentee ballots just for COVID because of, the danger of spreading COVID when doing that. And the 4th was prepaid postage, so that if you requested an absentee ballot, it came with that prepaid postage and you can mail it right out. And so coming back this year and kind of building on both of those sets of, the laws during regular session, but then the budget and special, House Bill 1888, which is a bill that I'm carrying, codifies 3 of those things. It codifies into law the drop boxes, the curing process, and prepaid postage. From there, it does a series of technical things that most people won't see, but will help make our process smoother, more transparent, will help ensure people's votes count. So for instance, it kind of clarifies if a voter requests an absentee ballot, but then decides they want to vote in person. It kind of clarifies the procedures for, well, how does that work? When do they vote regular? When do they have to cast a provisional ballot? It sets up in place kind of technical procedures for registrars around central absentee precincts. I think most importantly for the viewers, it also has a series of kind of regulations that will hopefully allow the vote tally to come in earlier in the night. So a lot of people, when they were watching the election, they were saying, well, hey, Mark Warner was declared the winner 1 minute after the election, but he's still losing on the screen 4 hours later. Well, why is that? And of course, that's because the way that absentee and early votes were being counted, they didn't get plugged in until late in the night. And so to kind of fix that, the bill does a couple things. It separates in-person voting from absentee voting when the registrars count the ballots, so that the early in-person voting can be tallied right away on election day, and you can see those come in early. It also then starts requiring registrars to pre-process those absentee ballots a week out, so that by the time we get to election day, most of the absentee ballots are already counted. It then tells them to start counting the other absentee ballots earlier in election day. And so we should have a smoother election process because of the bill. You'll still see some localities come in late, depending on the number of absentee ballots, but it should be a lot smoother than it was this past November. So we try to codify these changes that I think people really liked and really used, particularly, say, the drop boxes and prepaid postage. We try to make the technical changes that will make what was already a smooth process even smoother. I think it's important to note that there were 67 lawsuits after this election. Most of them were frivolous, but nonetheless, you didn't see that in Virginia. And that's because our election law was clear, it was transparent, everything was done legislatively on the front end. And so we didn't have to squabble in the courts over absentee ballots being counted if they came in late, like you saw in Pennsylvania, for example, because we had already changed that law. And so this just continues us on that track of being a leader in voter access and being a leader in election law, and really making us a gold standard in the country for elections, which is something that we've worked really hard over the last year to achieve. And it's something that I, as a civics teacher and a legislator on P&E, is really proud of.
Well, we really want to encourage the viewers to tune in to some of the meetings of your subcommittee, Delegate Price's subcommittee, other subcommittees, um, and the full committee of privileges and elections. And if they go on the lis.virginia.gov site, they can see the schedule. They can find it very easy to observe. And there's also a process where people can click on, they've got to do it before the meeting starts, and they can offer testimony, or they can be put in what's being called kind of a waiting room, where they could then be called on to testify. So the two chambers are making the best of this virtual process that's in place. And so really want to encourage people to follow these election laws and to be following other laws. And before our time would end, I know that Angel's been listening, and I know that this is an issue that's very important to her. And I wanted to give her an opportunity to ask the professor, the teacher, any question that she might have. Angel?
I do have one. As a civic teacher, how do you suggest people like your students to get more involved and feel like they're helping you take action?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think people find that when, to just get engaged, right? Start at your local and state level. And I think when people do get engaged, they find out, how meaningful that engagement can be and how quickly they can make a difference. And oftentimes it's at the levels that you pay the least attention to, because it's where the media pays the least attention to, right? And I don't mean that in a negative way, just in terms of a coverage way. And so, helping out local candidates or local elected officials, helping out in state campaigns or with state officials, hopping onto local groups that care about issues. So for example, if you care a lot about voting, helping a new Virginia majority or a League of Women Voters advocate for those issues. I think, when you see how approachable folks are, and when you see how much of a difference you can make at that level, it helps kind of build your confidence and enthusiasm for helping in other areas. And so I really think, the first step is just to find out where your passion is, and then what can you do at that local and state level to make a difference, because you'll find that you really can, right? It's really something where you can get out there and you can make change, and you can get people on your side pretty quickly. And it's, I think, in an age where there's a lot of cynicism about government, I think when you just go out there and engage and work with folks, it quickly, you shed that cynicism and you realize that American constitutional democracy really is a great system.
Well, thank you so much, Delegate Schuyler VanValkenburg. The advice that you were giving and answering Angel's question can apply to people of all ages. And
that's right.
We thank you for what you're doing, and we thank you very much for being on This Week in Virginia. And we'll be following your bills and your colleagues' bills and following the discussion on through the session. We're having a conversation on day 7. It seems like it's been going for 2 weeks or more, but it's only day 7. And there are many days yet to come before everything gets transmitted to the governor for his action to be taken. So thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.
Okay, Angel, you were able to listen to that conversation I had with Delegate Schuyler VanValkenburg. I know election issues is something that you wanted to be talking about, so thank you for your question. Before I ask you a couple of questions, though, tell our viewers a little bit more about yourself. I said you're a senior at VCU. I said you interned with us, and now you're going to be helping, but what else would viewers want to know about Angel Minor?
As being in VCU, I am a mass communications major focusing on PR and a minor in business, and I'm aspiring to go into marketing after I graduate.
Excellent, excellent. Now, on the show, what is it that you're planning to do?
I want to help the young people understand politics and social issues going on around them, because I know when I was in high school and up until this point that I had this internship, I didn't understand politics. I strayed away from it as much as I could. So I think it'll be really helpful to inform and help advise the younger generation to take action and to help get involved in their community.
Okay, who do you see as potential guests for the show?
Right now, I want to interview other young people who are trying to get involved or who are already getting involved, and any advice that they have for people who haven't gotten involved or where they see themselves going in the future. For the most part, it'd just be younger people getting their interpretations of the laws that's going on, the bills that's getting passed, and kind of understanding on both of our viewpoints where it's going.
I know they may develop as you move along, but what are some of the topics that you're hoping to cover?
I feel passionate about issues pertaining to equality and homelessness, gun control. I also want to touch on other public legislatures that's going on that's going to affect youth in this time frame, considering everything that's going on right now.
Good. Well, for those who would like to make a suggestion to you about either a topic or a guest, or for those who would say, oh, I want to reach David Bailey too with a suggestion for one of his shows, either way, they could send an email to TWIVA, it's like This Week in Virginia, TWIVA at Capital Square, CAPITOLSQUARE.com. And that way they'll reach Angel Minor, they'll reach me. So thanks, Angel. I look forward to your segments. And we thank our viewers for watching This Week in Virginia.